Everybody, today this video is actually for a particular subscriber. I hope other folks that are interested in Muskets and Tomahawks might find this interesting. But this is just really about the cards and what the cards are for the game and how you use them. In particular, this is for subscriber Kraftwerk VS. He's looking to get a local gaming group into Muskets and Tomahawks, but he doesn't have access to a deck of cards. And so he has contacted the company, and they'd mentioned to him that they're coming out with the second edition, that it's out of print right now, and the second edition could be a long way off, because every time I've heard that, it's been a while, I've heard that many times that it's coming out for second edition. It's a bit, I can't wait till it happens, but right now it's a bit of an inside joke for me that a second edition is coming until it does happen, in which case I'll be extremely excited. So Kraftwerk, I did recommend to you that if you don't have physical copies of the cards, I would recommend, it might be easier to make up little chits or tokens with the type of, essentially for each of the two main factions that you would use, and how it'll just list the troop type and number of activations for that troop type on the, and then you can put it similar to bolt action into a bag and shake it up and pull them out randomly. It will have the same effect as using these cards. But I'll show you the cards and how that relates to the book and their description of the cards. And then also, I'll kind of explain to you, if it's not clear, how that represents each faction that you mentioned in your message, as well as how that would translate to building a list and how you would build a deck. And so just quickly, I'm just going to show, I know you've seen this, but for everyone that's watching, we have two tables in the book, and one of them above shows the activation cards for each troop type. And so that's regular, irregular, provincial, militia, Indian, civilian, artillery. And then the next table actually shows another piece of information on each card, and that's the number of actions for each troop type. And so I have on the table here the deck, and it's actually split up in half here with the event cards up there. And so the French side, so regardless of when you play the game, you have basically French-American cards and you have British cards. And so it's always expecting that you're going to be playing, with two opposing sides, and depending on whether it's, let's say, American War of Independence or French-Indian War, you're either going to be using the French or the Americans, or a combination of the two, or someone representing an opposing side to the British. If you were playing Indian Wars or something else, you'd have to be creative. You'd have to say, I'm using the British, deck for this side, or I'm using, the French deck for this side. It doesn't provide anything beyond that. And so in this case, even if you were using all Indian lists, you would have to have British allied or French allied, or American allied natives. So at the very top, each faction is going to have a morale card and a forward boys card. So these will always be included to play within the rules of the game for the time that you will get an extra action with your forward boys card, or whether you actually are using the morale card because you've inserted that based on the rules into your deck for the following turn. Now, your cards are going to have, based on the troop type, a different number of cards. So regulars get 2 actions, but they only get 2 cards. So they get to basically do more when they're activated, but they get to go less times. Natives, Indians, it's 4 cards, 1 action. So you're actually going to get to go 4 times in a turn, but they're going to come out randomly each time. And you're not going to be able to do as much each time. And then you're going to have similar. You're going to have provincials for the French force. You're going to have civilians, irregulars, 4 of them. You're going to have militia, 3 cards, and then artillery. And then I could repeat exactly the same thing. You're just basically going to have an identical deck of cards here. And as you can see, they basically show how, it's 2 actions for regulars, and it's going to be 1 action each, and then so on. And it's based just on this table that we have right here, where it'll say number of activations, number of actions, I should say, for each troop type. So I hope that explains the forces and how, basically you get the same deck for no matter what force you're playing. The same opportunity. The troop types don't change in their number of actions based on the force, unless there's something written in the book that says remove a card or something. I can't remember that. I don't remember that being the case. But unless they specify in the rules somewhere something very specific to do differently, each side has the same cards available to them. You also have 3 event cards. I will admit that the way the events are handled in the rules is probably the least clear aspect of the rulebook and should be clarified in the next edition. But you would essentially insert these cards according to the way the book says. If you decide to do random events, you'll be putting 3 cards in there. The way I just kind of reviewed it, and the way that they say to use the cards is that if the number 1 card comes out first, then do a random event in the back. The way my opponents and I have just really done this instead is we just throw in 1 random event card, because they can be pretty debilitating. If we choose to do random events, we put 1 random event card for each turn. We've house ruled that, and you can follow the book to a T on that if you like. They do mention that that's the way to do it. But yeah, you'll just mix those into the deck. And so, just so it's clear, when you're building your deck, and I'm just going to go to a sample army list for the French Indian War. I'm just going to go to the British Army. When you look at the unit profiles, here you'll have the type of unit, and then you'll have the morale type. They're not always the same. And so later, when you're using the morale table in the game, you may have a type of troop, conceivably, that actually has a different morale type than the troop type of the card they're associated with. Typically, they're the same, but actually right below here is an example. Like, the British light infantry are irregular in the way their cards come out and their rules, but for morale purposes, they're regular, which regular is great morale, so it means they're a fairly strong unit. And so, when you build your deck, if we hypothetically had, let's say, 2 units of regulars and a group of natives with a leader, so a real small force, just to start out, and let's say both sides were exactly the same, then you would need shuffled into your deck, for this side, your forward boys and your morale. You're going to have 2 units of regulars. Now, a lot of people think that cards are associated with the miniature, but it's not. They're associated with the troop type. So you're going to take your 2 cards of regulars, and whenever this card flips up in the deck, all of your regulars are going to go. Any one of that troop type has the ability to go at that point. It's not that you use a card and then 1 unit goes. No, everybody goes and gets 2 actions. And then if you're going to have natives in that force, then you're going to shuffle in your native cards. Now, essentially, all of these cards here don't get used in that game for that side unless you decide to add something. So if you had more than just the natives and the 2 units of regulars, then you would add, let's say if you had artillery, you would add your artillery in there. And these would not get used. The number of cards that you actually put in there really doesn't represent at all the number of miniatures that you have in the game and when they're going. So if all you had were regulars, but you had a huge force, it just so happens that your force would be happening at very defined times within the game. So when this card came out, all of your units that were regulars would be going for 2 actions. And so it would mean that you would have to get your stuff done exactly when you wanted to. Most of the time, folks, in my experience, will take 2 to 3 at least, even in small games, types of troops. But really, like, the number of cards in the deck really doesn't, it's just going to change your strategy. If you have all your stuff happening at different times, you'll have to coordinate them at separate times, but it just creates different ways to play the game, which is an interesting kind of aspect of Muskets and Tomahawks in my mind. Now, really, you would be doing the same if I had just the 2 units of regulars, a leader, and which will be a regular in this case, unless you chose somebody that was different. It's most likely going to be a regular, not a native, if there's regulars in the army. But if you had the same thing, a mirrored unit, then you would have essentially this mirrored just on this side. So you would have your forward boys, your morale, and you would have your regulars and your natives, and then that would be your essential force for that game. And then you would take these cards, if you decided to use random events, and these cards, shuffle them up, and that's your deck to play. Like I said, if you wanted to add more, in your list, you grab whichever ones they are and you put them in. If your lists are different, obviously these lists are going to be different. And so, if this unit's artillery, primarily artillery, and then as well, let's say, not primarily artillery, but let's say you had irregulars and civilians, then you'd be swapping those out for irregulars and civilians, and these would remain, if that list was regulars and Indians, would remain the same. So, I don't, you shouldn't really need to see all the individual cards for me to go through and see them, in the sense that I've kind of showed them here, but really those two charts do show the number of cards in the one chart and then the number of actions on each card in the other. And that should be enough to build your own deck. There may be, I know you said you kind of looked, but there should be some stuff online. Like there should be one or two places where they might have cards, in a PDF form, sort of like a fan-created set of cards. It may take a little bit of looking, but I would honestly recommend maybe just going the route of the chits instead of this. Arguably, it might even be a bit of a better. I mean, the cards, I've taken care of mine because I knew how hard it was to get another deck, but I think that, throwing sort of chits or tokens that are labeled that are all equally weighted and kind of basically the same into a bag, they're probably more durable over time than cards are anyway. Yeah. So until the second edition comes out and they release the next version of how to do this is how you essentially play the game and how you build your deck and how you use it. I hope that explains for you, how you could maybe approach this with your gaming group. And feel free to leave comments if you have any further questions. I'm happy to answer them. Yeah. Okay. Take care.